You know, when most of us think about Greek mythology, our minds immediately jump to primitive bedtime stories. We kind of picture ancient people living in this magical, innocent harmony with nature, seeing forest nymphs peeking out from behind every single tree. Well, today we're going to completely shatter that illusion. Welcome to This Explainer. We're about to journey into what is, quite literally, one of the most revolutionary cultural milestones in all of human history. So let's get right into it.
The ancient historian Herodotus actually hit the nail on the head when he wrote, "Of old, the Hellenic race was marked off from the barbarian as more keen-witted and more free from nonsense." It's so true. We really need to pop this romanticized bubble that early mankind was just out there peopling the world with bright fancies and lovely visions. The reality of the prehistoric wilderness was completely different, and to truly understand the Greeks, we first have to understand exactly what they were rising above.
So that brings us to part one, the myth of the primitive.
To grasp the magnitude of what the Greeks did, just picture the ancient, terrifying world that existed before them. Back then, early humanity was just terrified. The forest wasn't full of gentle nymphs, it was full of horrors. People worshipped incomprehensible, totally unhuman things. Think of the towering colossi in Egypt, rigid women with cat heads, or Mesopotamian men with bird heads and massive eagle wings. The whole ancient world was basically centered around primeval terror, magic, and human sacrifice. But then, the Greeks did something absolutely unbelievable. They flipped the script and gave their gods human shapes. Suddenly, they brought rationality and beauty into the universe. Heaven actually became companionable. They made the terrifying unknown feel safe, almost matter of fact. I mean, even their most fantastic myths were grounded in this relatable reality. Take the winged horse Pegasus, for example. He didn't just vanish into the ether at the end of the day. After skimming the air all day long, he literally went to a cozy, comfortable stable in Corinth every night to sleep.
All right, moving right along to part two, the Greek miracle.
What we're talking about here is a massive philosophical mind-bender that completely altered the trajectory of human history. The Greek miracle is basically defined as a humanized world suddenly freed from the paralyzing fear of some omnipotent unknown. With the awakening of Greece, mankind woke up one day and realized, hey, we are the center of a rational universe. And here's the absolute most shocking theological shift of all. The Greeks did not believe the gods created the universe. They believed the exact opposite. They believed that the universe created the gods. First came heaven and earth, and from them, everything else followed.
Which perfectly sets up part three, the divine family tree.
Because the Greeks viewed the universe as a highly logical, rational place, they organized the creation of divine beings into a very structured system. So mapping out this lineage, we start right at the top. You have heaven and earth. Together, they birth the massive elder gods known as the Titans. So figures like Ocean, Atlas, Prometheus, and arguably the most important, Cronus. Cronus, or Saturn as the Romans called him, ruled for untold ages. That is, until he was ultimately overthrown by his very own son, Zeus. The Titans were forced to step down, and the grandchildren completely took over the universe.
And that introduces us to part four, meet the Olympians.
So here they are, the new rulers of the universe. They made their home on Olympus, which was this mysterious region of perfect peace, high above the mountains, completely untouched by wind, rain, or snow. Let's run through the roster of these 12 major players, the divine family. We've got Zeus and his two brothers, Poseidon and Hades. There's their sister Hestia, Zeus's wife Hera, and their son Ares. Then you have Zeus's other children, Athena, Apollo, Aphrodite, Hermes, and Artemis. And finally, Hera's son Hephaestus. But as we go through them, we aren't just going to look at their immense superpowers. We're going to look at their deeply flawed, relatable human characteristics. Because remember, making them human is exactly what banished the terror of the ancient world. Let's start with the big guy, Zeus, lord of the sky, wielder of the absolute awful thunderbolt. His power was genuinely greater than all the other divinities combined. And yet, he wasn't omnipotent and he definitely wasn't omniscient. He could totally be tricked. What's so fascinating is the paradox of his character. On one hand, he was endlessly amorous, resorting to all sorts of ridiculous tricks to hide his infidelities from his wife. But as Greek civilization matured, so did Zeus. He evolved. He became a protector of the weak. By the time of the poet Hesiod, who, by the way, was just a poor farmer, Zeus wasn't just some muscle for the strong anymore. Justice literally sat beside his throne. He transformed into the universal father and the ultimate standard of right action.
Next up is Hera, his wife and sister actually, queen of Olympus and the fierce protector of marriage. Now, she had an implacable, terrifying anger towards Zeus's lovers. She punished them relentlessly, no matter how innocent or coerced they might have been.
But here's a wild, surprising fact about the ancient Greeks. They absolutely loved this about her. They found her typical jealous wife persona highly entertaining. Her ingenious tricks to outsmart her husband and punish her rivals were essentially the stuff of comedy for them. Being able to laugh at the gods made them companionable. I mean, think about it, you could never ever laugh at a terrifying Egyptian sphinx.
Then there's Zeus's brother, Poseidon. Wielding his famous trident, he was the earth shaker and the lord of the sea. For the Greeks, who were primarily seamen out there navigating the vital, unpredictable Mediterranean waters, Poseidon was pretty much everything. He could command the storm winds to rise up and destroy you, or he could quiet the roaring surges into total, tranquil peace. And interestingly enough, beyond ruling the waters, he was also hugely honored for giving the very first horse to humanity.
Now, let's contrast two totally different takes on war deities. First, we have Athena. She famously sprang fully grown and in full armor straight out of Zeus's head. Talk about a headache, right? But she was the goddess of the city, of civilized life, wisdom, and reason. She only ever fought to defend the state. And then there's Eris, the god of war. And this might actually shock you, but the ancient Greeks fundamentally despised the guy. In Homer's Iliad, he's described as blood-stained and murderous, sure, but also as a whining coward who literally bellows with pain and runs away the second he gets wounded. It was actually the Romans, much later on, who loved Mars and rebranded him into this glorious, invincible warrior.
And speaking of contrasts, check out these twins, Apollo and Artemis. Apollo is the god of light and truth, the absolute master musician. His famous oracle at Delphi was considered the center of the world, serving as this purely beneficent link between gods and men. By Zeus's own decree, no lie could ever come from Apollo's lips. His twin sister Artemis, however, was the lady of wild things and the huntsman in chief. She was the moon to his sun. She was the fierce protectress of dewy youth, but, reflecting the deep contradictions of myth, she also had a really dark side. She actually once kept the entire Greek fleet from sailing until they sacrificed a maiden to her. So definitely not someone to cross.
Moving right along, we have a really interesting juxtaposition. The ultimate beauty paired with the supposedly physically flawed. There's Aphrodite, who was born from the sea foam near Cythera. She was the irresistible, laughter-loving goddess of love and beauty. She brought light and joy wherever she went, although, to be fair, in later poems, she could exert a pretty deadly, treacherous power over men. Ironically, in most of the stories, her husband is Hephaestus, the god of fire. He was the only immortal who was physically ugly and lame, even cast out of heaven in some versions of the myth. And yet, in Homer's world, he is a highly honored, totally peace-loving smith. He's the armorer of the gods. He forges their incredible dwellings and their weapons, and he is deeply, deeply respected for his vital role in building civilization.
Wrapping up the main Olympian crew, we have Hermes and Hestia. Hermes was just everywhere, universally active, graceful, swift, rocking those iconic winged sandals. He was the shrewd master thief who actually stole Apollo's herds of cows before he was even a single day old. He served as Zeus's personal messenger and, kind of surprisingly, the solemn guide of the dead. In stark contrast to all that action, we have Hestia. She played almost zero part in the wild, dramatic myths. She was the virgin goddess of the hearth. She was just the quiet, foundational presence of the home. In fact, every single meal began and ended with an offering to her sacred fire. She was the pure, unwavering symbol of domestic life.
All right, let's head downstairs for Part 5, Realms Beyond Olympus.
You see, this rational, highly organized Greek worldview wasn't just limited to the sky. It extended all the way downward, deep into the unseen world. Down there, we find the third brother, Hades, also known as Pluto. He was actually the god of wealth, too, because of all the precious metals hidden deep in the earth. Hades rarely ever left his dark, shadowy realm to visit Olympus. Honestly, he just wasn't a very welcome visitor up there. But it is absolutely vital to note that while he was unpitying and inexorable, he was considered a strictly just, terrible god, not an evil one. He ruled fairly down there alongside his queen Persephone.
And honestly, just look at how incredibly organized death itself became for them. The early Greeks took the terrifying, absolute unknown of death and transformed it into a highly structured, logical geographical journey.
When a soul dies, it has a route. First, it has to cross the river Acheron with the aged ferryman Charon, provided, of course, they were buried with the passage money. Then they have to pass through the adamantine gate, guarded by Cerberus, the legendary three-headed dog. Next up, they stand before 3 judges who pass the final sentence. And finally, based entirely on how they live their life, they are sent either way down to everlasting torment in Tartarus or to a beautiful place of blessedness in the Elysian fields. Everything has its place. Everything makes perfect sense.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The entire Greek miracle was all about shifting the center of the universe squarely onto humanity. They took a chaotic, utterly terrifying world filled with monsters and incomprehensible beast gods, and they transformed it into a rational universe by remaking the divine in their own deeply flawed yet beautiful human image. So it leaves us with this pretty big question to reflect on. If the Greeks made their gods in their own human image to banish fear and to make sense of their world, what do our modern myths, our superheroes, our sci-fi monsters, our pop culture icons say about us today? What deep-seated fears are we trying to banish right now? Think about that as you continue to explore the fascinating world of mythology. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.